What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another album review for you guys. This time we're going to do one that perhaps not a lot of people would expect out of me, and that is the 21st, you heard me correctly, the 21st studio album from longtime German metal legends, Gravedigger with Symbol of Eternity. So this came out on August 26th on Rock of Angel Records. This band formed back in 1980 and have been one of the most consistent bands in not just classic metal or power metal, whatever you want to call them, but in all of metal. Like, these guys have been pumping out music since about 1983 or 1982 with their early demos, and then their first full-length heavy metal breakdown in 1984, and yeah, from 86 to 93, name changes and a hiatus, but since 1993, they've been pumping out an album, feels like every 2-3 years, so they've been very consistent at putting out music. Full disclosure, this is the first Gravedigger album I've listened to in full. I've may have heard a song or two in the past in like compilation videos, and I liked what I heard. So when I saw that this band had a new album coming out, it's like, you know what? I'm going to give them a shot. How does it fare? Well, why don't we take a look? So after a horn string chanting instrumental with the Siege of Aachen, we get into Battle Cry, and really that's kind of the vibe we get all throughout this album. This whole album feels like one gigantic battle cry for something. Starts off with like a gritty speed metal riff. Then the verses come in with this like galloping D beat going, and then even the choruses, and really as a whole the choruses on this album have some epic ambience going on, but not in like the modern day power metal sense where it's like all symphonic and all operatic. It's like you hear a little bit of that, but it's not completely over the top. It's just epic enough to enhance the choruses, and Battle Cry was no different, and even the riffs kind of felt epic. Then the bridge has this like really cool like Judas Priest riff going on while the D beat is happening, and pretty much all throughout this album you get some awesome lead work, and they're all very different from one another. They don't follow the same format in terms of like the lead guitar work. Like on this track, it definitely showcases a lot more shred, like classic metal shredding powers, but really cool way to start off the album with Battle Cry. Then we get to Hell Is My Purgatory, and you start off with a really cool bass line, and the bass is very prominent all throughout this album. Yeah, it can get a little bit buried by the guitars, but the bass is audible pretty much all the way through, which is good. And after that bass line comes in, you get into another classic metal riff, and really this track with the verses and the choruses definitely feels like Judas Priest. Like top to bottom, there is Judas Priest laced all over this album. And then the leads you get on this track definitely have more melodic character on top, as opposed to just shredding to see how well you can shred. Here they put more melody into these leads. Then we get into King of the Kings, where we get a wild drum intro before you get some fast and intense riffage with more of the D beat coming back. And then the verses, now this is interesting, like this song kind of changes tempo quite a bit. Like it starts off pretty fast, then the verses kind of get into like a slow, almost doomy groove, but with some like melodic guitar progressions in the background. And then the choruses kind of get into that more like that epic power metal vibe, but still feeling really, really, really gritty. And then the bridge, now the bridge on here kind of takes a different turn in the song. Like it feels a little bit more sinister and evil with the guitars and the way everything is being built up. But then you get into a breakdown and with tapping leads all over. So this was the only track where you heard tapping leads happen on top of a breakdown before it transitions into a D beat, and then the lead gets more melodic and with a little bit more feel to it. The title track, which might be my favorite song of the album, starts off with this like melodic somber riff to kind of set the mood for this track, and then it gets doomy with some beautiful guitars, or acoustic guitars, And the verses are very, very soft and very somber with the atmospherics, and it's unique in comparison to most of the songs on the album, as these verses almost feel like a funeral for somebody. Not like a funeral doom thing, but like honoring somebody in death. And then the choruses brings back the electric guitars, but still complement that somber atmosphere masterfully well. Once again, more Judas Priest vibes show up on the bridge, and then the lead here, definitely a lot more atmosphere laced throughout. Then we get to Saladin, which is an interesting title, which is this like 30-second dark instrumental that has like maybe a little bit of a Middle Eastern influence, something that I think Niall would look at and be like, that's really good. Knights of Jerusalem, fast, aggressive, but catchy riff with more galloping D beats to begin. Then the verses slows the beat down, but there's still double bass happening, and then the choruses with the drums get really groovy while the guitars are just chugging along like a runaway train that's staying on the track somehow. And then the lead here combines melody and shred really, really well once again. Then we get to Heart of a Warrior, which is another one of my favorites off of the album. Kind of starts off with like almost like a thrashy Judas Priest riff, like something off of Painkiller or even Firepower. Like it's kind of thrashy, but still with that Priest influence. And the verses and the choruses pretty much keep that vibe going, while in the verses you get more of the cool melody in the background, and then the choruses kind of turns very anthemic with more of those like battle cry vibes, which was really sweet. Awesome drum solo before you get into the guitar solos that kind of feel like a continuation of the leads from the previous track, and even like cool drum beat changes follow after the guitar solos. Grace of God starts off with almost like a Western-inspired acoustic guitar and bass line before it turns somber yet aggressive. You might think, well, how do you do somber and aggressive at the same time? Listen to the riff that follows the acoustic and the bass, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. The verses definitely feel very sad, as it feels like you're witnessing a sad moment in a Western town, and also it kind of tells a story of someone dealing with self-doubt. The pre-choruses get really aggressive. Then the choruses themselves, like the first chorus, is very quiet, but it has some meaning to it. Then the rest of the choruses get really heavy. Beautiful acoustic break before you get to probably the most somber lead work of the entire album, and just adds on to that kind of depressing vibe that this song carries forth. Sky of Swords, epic riff with somber atmosphere to start off, before it turns very energetic, and then it gets into a badass groove. And that groove is pretty much felt throughout the verses and even the choruses, while the choruses brings back some of the epic ambience. And I also love the melodic feeling lead on this track in particular, as it feels like a brave knight's coming in to save the day, almost like a theme song for a brave knight of sorts. Holy Warfare starts off with like almost like an Iron Maiden riff, like an old school Iron Maiden riff from somewhere like Peace of Mind, Power Slave, that time frame. And that's what gets this track going before the verses get into more of like the gritty battles happening. Pre-choruses get mid-tempo before the choruses come in and brings back the speed, but again, maintaining epic quality. Cool lead here, and this is probably the most diverse lead of the album because it pretty much encompasses everything that the leads on this album have to offer: shred, feel, and melody. And I know there was a cover song at the end, but I'm not going to talk about that song. We're going to talk about, in my opinion, the real closer, The Last Crusade, which was the longest song of the album by 2 seconds over Symbol of Eternity, the title track. Chugging doom riff coming in with some epic progressions to begin, even a cool bass line that follows. And the verses, and even the choruses, almost feel like old school Manowar, where they feel like a middle ground between power metal, doom metal, and classic metal. Like it's slow, but it's epic, but filled with a lot of attitude and balls. And then shredding lead to close this chapter of the story of this album, because this is a concept album. I believe the band said that it was a sequel to Knights of the Cross, which was in 1998, which I probably am going to have to check that album out to hear how it ties into this. But overall, as far as the production, it feels like an mid to late 80s recording. Like, it's gritty, but everything is audible. Like, it's raw, nasty, but you can hear everything. You can hear the bass, you can hear the guitars, the vocals, the drums, the ambience, all that stuff. So, for an old school style production, this was really well done. Of course, some of the songs did kind of get a bit formulaic, where it's like, oh, we have these like gritty, badass verses, and then the choruses get not to the levels of epic quality of like modern power metal or symphonic metal, but epic enough to where it just enhances everything. Yeah, it did kind of feel a bit formulaic, that most of these songs kind of had that feeling, but it worked. It really did work for the most part. The guitar work is top-notch on here, the lead work in particular. Like, you get everything: melody, shred, feel, atmosphere. Pretty much, I can't think of a poor moment on this album in terms of the guitar work. Like I said, perhaps the only complaint I had was that maybe the songs did kind of feel a bit formulaic in terms of how they would go from being badass gritty in the verses to epic choruses somewhat. And also, perhaps it does have a little bit of it does feel a little derivative of like bands that were kind of like their contemporaries back in the day, of like Halloween and Rage and Running Wild, because those three, along with Gravedigger, are considered the big four of German power metal. Well, that's before Blind Guardian and Gamma Ray came into play, but you get what I mean. But I do like it for that fact, because it does bring back some of those vibes, especially like the Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Manowar vibes. Those were the standouts for me in terms of like the riff writing, and even the grooves kind of had that Priest vibe to it, which I really liked. So if you are a fan of particularly Painkiller and Firepower Judas Priest, you're going to find a lot of good stuff on here. I know I did. So score-wise, call me nuts, I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. I thought this was a great album, and it doesn't feel like it overstays its welcome. Yes, some of the fat could have been trimmed off of a couple of tracks. Maybe you could have cut a song or two out, make it like, because it's about 45 minutes. Well, 50 minutes if you count the cover songs, so they maybe could have trimmed the fat on a couple of songs. But aside from that, this is a hell of an album. I probably might pick this one up, because this was some really good, great stuff on here. Now, I wouldn't call it straight up power metal. Like, it has a little bit of that vibe. I would say this is more towards old school, like almost like a mix of like early power metal and new wave of British heavy metal. I feel like would be the better way to go about it. So 9 out of 10. What did you guys think of Symbol of Eternity by Gravedigger? Let me know in the comments section below. And until next time, horns high. See you guys soon. Trouble the Skull. 1985, this is Trouble's sophomore effort, and this is the Hammerhard Records reissue that came out last year. This is amazing doom metal that has a lot of Christian lyrics, but it's Christian lyrics done right. It's mostly the somber, dark stories about Christianity, and I mean, even inside the case it says a verse: "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you with all malice, and be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you."